Hello everyone, this is Eva Nolik-Smith with Yoga U Online, and I'm very excited to be here today with yoga therapist and author Robin Rothenberg. Robin is the founding director of Essential Yoga Therapy, an IAYT accredited yoga therapy training program in Seattle, Washington. And she has been teaching yoga therapeutically for more than 30 years. Robin has spent years particularly focusing on functional movement as it relates to yoga asana practice. And she specializes in utilizing adaptive asana and breathing practices to break chronic pain patterns and reset the body to move with greater stability and freedom. Robin is also the author of the Essential Low Back Program, and she has been a contributor in creating the research protocol for some of the leading studies on yoga for back pain. Welcome, Robin. We are so happy to have you.
Wonderful to be here. Always like to work with you and Yoga U.
So we're here today to talk about your work with people suffering from back pain issues in the upper body, particularly neck and shoulder pain. And your interest in this topic stems back to struggling with your own injuries and issues in that area. Is that correct?
It certainly is. Yeah. Back when I was actually pretty new as a teacher, I had gone through a series of low back issues and had some resolution with those. And then I incurred, probably of all the injuries that I incurred during my rather aggressive initial yoga practice, asana practice, was injury in my neck. And so I remember very distinctly raising my arms to do Virabhadrasana 2 in class. I was teaching and I said, okay, inhale and raise your arms, and my right arm fell down and I couldn't lift it back up again. And I'm, inside I'm thinking, that's not good. And so I was studying with a particular teacher at that time and did some individual work, and ended up going to PT, and was diagnosed as having cervical disc compression at C4, C5, and ended up with about 18 months of pretty severe acute chronic pain. And the way I describe it is by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was pretty much on the couch saying, like, morphine, I don't care. Like, the pain was so intense. And it was the result of, among other things, very weak and not very well aligned or aware upper body neck issues, and compounded by a practice at that time that started with a headstand and headstand variations. With no rep. And like I said, a lot of avidya, ignorance on my part, and unfortunately, I must say, on the teacher that I was studying with at the time, on his part as well. So the result was that my shoulder imbalance and weakness and my neck imbalance and weakness ended me up with compression, which ended up with some thoracic outlet and numbness, tingling, weakness all down my arm. And it took a lot of time to resolve that, and the PT helped a lot. But I found that I mean, clearly I knew that the headstands, I had to stop doing that, and I couldn't do downward dog, anything that put pressure that was weight bearing on my upper body. And yet I knew there was weakness. So I just started working on my own, like what resolves this? There was all this attention, and there often is this attention to the opening of the front of the body and sort of, stretching, which is helpful. But, from all the work that I consistently do with Yoga U, that my mantra is you can't stretch it better. That the strength part is equally important, and there just wasn't enough. Like, I couldn't go from as weak as I was to headstand. What got me in trouble in the first place is I didn't have the strength in my upper body or neck to sustain that. And so how do I strengthen and sort of progressively work my way back to health and healing letting go of the goal being to do headstand again. I didn't know if that was ever in my cards. So, so that started a whole process of inquiry and exploration through the use of weights and adaptive asana. And then, of course, I met Tom Myers and got introduced to the arm lines, as well as an awareness of the core work that I had taken from and utilized with my low back work, and recognizing that the core goes all the way up. And so that developed into a whole way of working with the back of the body, the back of the upper body, and what I came to have come to call the mid back core, which Tom thought was pretty cool. And it's an integration really of the abdominal core and the neck core, what happens in between, and even more so as I've done this exploration with the breath, I've become very aware that the center point of the body is the lower rib cage, the diaphragm, and that there's this beautiful link between upper body and lower body if we know how to access it.
To engage,
and there's a big difference in what goes on above and below.
Yeah. You used an interesting term, the neck core.
Absolutely.
What do you consider the neck core?
So, the deep front line, that deep inner core line that starts from the inner arches, goes up through the inner calves, inner thighs, the adductor complex, pelvic floor, transverse abdominis, iliopsoas, up into the diaphragm, pericardium. They're all part of that same deep front line, and it continues up into the longus coli, which are the stabilizers in the deep scalenes, stabilizers of the neck. And they're the Jalandhara bandha muscles. The bandhas and the deep front line are in cahoots. They're the same thing. Yogis, the ancient yogis really got it. And that's why they worked with the bandhas and worked with the breath the way that they did. And then we sort of abandoned a lot of those essential tenets of our postural practices to emphasize more of, how loose and contorted could you make your body. And unfortunately, we've not done ourselves, or for those of us that are teachers or our students, much good. I think we need to get back to that essential understanding of how to stabilize first and mobilize from that very strong, stable center.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And more broadly, I think, the neck and shoulder issues is an issue that's familiar to a lot of people, particularly since a lot of us spend a lot of time in front of the computer every day, and chronic neck and shoulder pain really affects millions of people. And it's not just an issue of chronic pain. It can also affect us systemically in terms of lower energy, reduced well-being. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to talk about that. So there's a couple of things. One of the things that I've noticed in the yoga community, especially around the neck and shoulders, there's a lot of, I'm just going to use this term. Sorry if I offend anybody. Kind of party tricks around neck and shoulders, like ways of stretching, releasing, kind of palliative, relaxation techniques. Do this stretch and it'll help you to feel better. Do this stretch and it'll help you to feel better. Do this little, somatic work and it'll help you to feel better, which is true. There's a lot of things that can give you that immediate sense of release. Lay over the physio ball, those kinds of things. The problem is that as soon as we come out of the stretch and we go back into our pattern, it comes back in again. So there's a lack of resilience and a little bit too focused, in my opinion, my bias, on the localized area of tension, as opposed to looking at the whole pattern of posture, breath, functional movement, functional breathing from the base all the way up. So people are often surprised when they work with me they come in because they've got neck and shoulder issues, and a lot of my clientele do. And even when I do my training programs on the neck and shoulder, we start with the core, and we start with the pelvic girdle, and we start with the engagement of the abdominal core, and work our way up and work with functional breathing, because we can't actually transform the upper body without linking it to what's going on below.
Right, right. Yeah.
And along with that, that's directly related to your question around energy, is that functional breathing and functional movement go together. And what I mean by that is that the diaphragm, which is the central breathing muscle, is, in addition to being the central breathing muscle, it is also a very important part of the core stabilization complex. So it works, it's designed to work in tandem with the transversus abdominis and the oblique muscles. And so that when the diaphragm contracts and moves down, the abdominal muscles expand, and then as you exhale, they contract and come in, and that assists the diaphragm in that inward movement where it cups up. And so functional breathing is very much about the core being engaged appropriately, so that the abdominals are always syncing and oscillating with the diaphragm. Now, when we sit in our computer slump position, and I'll just kind of angle to get into it, right? What happens is that we effectively cut off the abdominals from the diaphragm, so that now the abdominals are flaccid. And as a result, the diaphragm is no longer doing what it needs to do to breathe well. So what happens, it has to happen, is that the accessory muscles of the chest become used, they start to be used as primary breathers. And so what happens is people breathe up instead of out. Okay. What happens to all of the musculature in the neck and shoulders when 20 to 30,000 times a day, that's how many times we breathe, we're contracting, we're contracting, we're contracting. So not only is it, so there's a combination of things. It creates chronic tension all the way up through the jaw. That can create headaches and tension in the head, TMD, joint pain, obviously tension, more tension in the eyes. It goes with interior head posture. That has a lot of issues with the neck and shoulders as well. But you're also not getting the full range of the diaphragm, which means your prana is going to be affected, because you cannot breathe effectively and fully when you're in that slump position. So it's working on both sides, on both sides to, on the anamaya and the physical sheath, it's creating a lot of tension and excessive contraction. And then it's also depleting the energy. And because we're not getting the full range of the diaphragm, our oxygen levels are lowered. It has less to do with how much breath we take in, and more to do with our inability to get the breath to the lower lobes of the lungs, which require good posture. So that, because that's where the most perfusion and exchange happens between oxygen and CO2. So if we're breathing in the upper lobes of the lungs, there's just not as much exchange through the capillaries, so that you're not getting such good oxygenation. And in fact, this is kind of from my latest research for my book on the breath, that it takes between 15 and 25% more oxygen to chest breathe than diaphragmatically breathe. So you're taking in this beautiful air, and then right off the top you lose 15 to 25% just by chest breathing, which means there's less oxygen for, pinky fingers, liver, brain, the rest of the body that really needs the nourishment of that oxygen. Wow,
interesting. Yeah, I know that you are, one of your new passions is the breath, the role of the breath and diaphragmatic movement in our overall health. And as you made reference to, you're writing a book on it. And I was, in some of the material you sent me before the interview, I was very curious to see that it's a trend in rehabilitation science now to look at the breath as a possible precursor to chronic musculoskeletal pain. So how did that happen? If researchers believe that we can't treat musculoskeletal pain without first looking at breathing patterns. What's the connection there? Other than what, I mean, I know that you just talked about the chronic pain in the chronic tension, but is it that specific upper breathing pattern that creates it, or is there like broader, different kinds of dysfunctional breathing patterns at play?
There are different kinds of dysfunctional breathing patterns. The chest breathing is probably the most pervasive, and it often goes with mouth breathing. There's actually a connection between mouth breathing and chest breathing versus nose breathing and diaphragmatic breathing in terms of the way that we're wired. So if we're mouth breathing, and people often don't realize that they're mouth breathing in through their life. And once you get tuned in, you walk down the street, you can see how many people are mouth breathers.
Interesting.
I, for instance, didn't know what a pervasive mouth breather I was. I always breathe through my nose on my yoga mat, but that was the least of my day, right? Like,
right.
What was going on the other 23 hours, including sleep? So sleep counts. So mouth breathing at night, snoring, sleep apnea, these are all breathing pattern disorders. And mouth breathing goes with the chest breathing. And so people don't realize how pervasive that pattern can be and repetitive. So in that, they're not only, it's a combination. You got to think about it again, the whole body. So, not only does it create this chronic tension in the upper body, and not only does it decrease the amount of oxygen that's available to be dispersed and distributed throughout the body, but it also unlinks, it breaks the kinetic chain between the abdominal core and the diaphragm. And so what happens is the core gets weaker, and the weaker the core is and the less functional the diaphragm is, the more the body still wants and needs to breathe. So the more it recruits those accessory muscles. So it's like a vicious cycle. So the breathing pattern disorder gets worse. And part of the chest breathing, mouth breathing syndrome is low level hyperventilation. We're actually breathing out too much of our CO2. And then that creates chronic tension, and it's linked to anxiety and digestive issues and inflammatory conditions, which of course stress people out. Then people are more stressed, and then what do? They breathe more.
Right.
So it's huge.
Yeah, that is huge.
So syncing the studies that you refer to, and part of my research has really taken me back to how important it is as yoga teachers that we really get people breathing functionally and using our beautiful asana practices to help people to sync the diaphragm back up with the abdominals to help to alleviate upper back and neck and shoulder tension, to stabilize and support the lower back. That goes together, right? We get the core strong and the core synced with the diaphragm. The diaphragm works more efficiently. People's nervous system calms down. They get out of that sympathetic fight or flight mode. They're more relaxed, and the whole being feels better as a result. And yoga has this wonderful mind, body, asana, breath, mindful awareness.
Right.
Like it's this amazing tool for transforming this if teachers have the education to know how to do it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not complicated. It's just like once you get your head around it, it's like if we get people functionally breathing, their movement will be more functional and they'll be less likely to be injured. And that's what those studies show. I mean, even along with that functional breathing and SI joint stability go together. That when people are not using their diaphragm and their abdominals well, they're more likely to have SI problems. Or let's say the people with SI problems are often shown to not be functional breathers.
Very interesting. We have a course coming up with you on freeing the neck and the shoulder girdle and releasing chronic tension patterns. It sounds like we should rename it to freeing the breath to change your life.
Okay, I'm game to do that one with you too. But I will be also working specifically. The other big piece is this mid-back core and the stabilizers of the upper back and really activating them in conjunction with the diaphragm and proper breathing, but working with the placement of the shoulders and teaching people functional movement in the upper body, which has a lot to do with the scapula and moving from the scapula as opposed to the ball joint of the shoulders. And again, there's sort of like these ABCs of the upper back and neck and shoulders that as I work with people, it's like the same thing in slightly different iterations that I bring to people, and it really makes a big difference. So it's I feel like it's very teachable, and these are just little basic fundamental essentials of functional movement that teachers can take into every class and just keep emphasizing, and it can make a huge difference in terms of how people feel in their upper body.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You mentioned Tom Myers, and one of the things he has this concept of spatial medicine, which has to do with understanding how our structure affects our health and how we can improve our health by changing our structure. And I think this is such a perfect example of that, and particularly in this age of forward head posture, the kind of issues that you're talking about are rampant. And I think it's such a good point that unconsciously a lot of us are becoming poor breathers by divorcing, the abdominals from the upper part of the body. So it's such an important course, and we're really so excited about it. Is there any other things that people should know about what you'll be covering? You made reference to quite a number of key points.
And I just want to put out this one kind of, it's one of those facts that I learned through the teachers who have been teaching me about the breath. And one of them in particular was Alba Courtney, who's an incredible osteopath and breath educator, and has published about 8 or 9 studies on breathing and movement and posture. And one of the things that I had not put together that she really emphasized is with the forward head posture, which is if we only come at it from the mechanical perspective, right, of like opening the front of the body and strengthening the back of the body, but we don't change people's breath patterns. If people are mouth breathers and chest breathers, they actually can't move into what we would call sort of proper alignment, because in doing so, it'll compress the airways. We actually have to transform their breathing pattern in order for them to be able to stand in Tadasana. And if we aren't working at it from the perspective of the breath and transforming that equally with the mechanics of it, it'll never work, because they'll go right back into forward head posture in order to breathe, which is obviously going to be the more important piece that they can breathe. And
arguably,
there's a little experiment that you can do with that, but it's very simple, which is if you open your mouth and you breathe and you go into your forward head position. Okay, now keep breathing through your mouth and bring yourself into Tadasana. Keep breathing through your mouth, Eva, and come into Tadasana.
Oh yes, yeah.
Can you breathe?
Right,
Can you feel it closes that off.
Yes,
So
yes.
if you become a functional nose breather, you actually can't get out of the anterior head position.
Very interesting points.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling how, these little things that we don't think about, how we use the body just can make such a huge difference. And what you just been talking about is such a tremendous piece of it, with the integration of the breath with posture. So thank you so much for joining us, Robin. So much to digest here, and you always are one of our we have so many talented and wonderfully educated teachers, but you're always one of the most studied and brilliant and smart people among all the smart people that we get to deal with. So we're very, very excited about the course coming up.
Thank you so much. I love the opportunity to share. That's I love to study. I love to learn. It's really I think I'm a passionate student, and that's what spawns a lot of this, is that I just keep wanting to know why and understand more about the connections. I love the connections. So whatever I can do to share that with others, that's my
Yeah.
it's my dharma. And thank you for giving me the platform, offering me the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing of this tremendously important knowledge. So we very much look forward to your course.
All right. Thank you, Eva.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.